I would, first things first, like to issue a formal apology to Wet Leg. More because they scared me at first than anything. I got a notification from Spotify telling me to listen to Wet Leg and their single Your Mum, and honestly that left me in a real negative headspace. Fortunately, the band themselves are hella likeable and definitely worth the listen. Or, maybe they're not. I've seen people complaining about them being industry plants. I always hate those claims, but I've definitely seen more outrageous industry plant accusations than this, so whatever. If they are industry plants, at least they're an improvement on tramp stamps. Also, some people just genuinely seem to despise the music itself. Again, you do you, but there's a ton of fun bangers here. Personally, I fucking love them as a group. I mean, during my brief browse of their music videos and YouTube channel in preparation of making this video, I stumbled upon their search for Mop Man, and it's honestly a pretty funny side piece for them. Plus, you can also see Hester Chambers' face, which is often obscured in their videos, so that's nice. Previously, I'd had to assume that she was some sort of blonde female Slenderman thing, so the knowledge that she is actually human is comforting. For me, that's actually got to be the biggest pull of Wet Leg. I mean, they're called Wet Leg, for God's sake. They've got to be likeable to some degree. I always appreciate an artist or group not taking themselves too seriously, and Wet Leg have got a great balance between humour and sincerity. All in all, it makes a pretty solid set foundation to base your project on, one where the personability of the musicians amplifies the enjoyability of the music. To start with, there's one of my favourite tracks on the entire project, Being in Love, which I personally think might be the most underrated cut on the entire album. It's one of the strongest from a lyrical perspective at the very least, a short and sharp depiction of the negative feelings and emotions one might associate with being in love and the internal conflict that this brings. And as long as we're talking non-singles, I do want to say a quick word about Loving You, which ironically I don't love, but I think it's probably the most solid of the more low-key cuts on the project, definitely one I enjoyed more after a few listens. But, of course, those tracks aren't really the main appeal of this record, because the reason so many people were hyped about this release is, in the first place, was the singles, of which there were 6. And while I do think that releasing so many singles was a mistake, given it's about half the album, it was definitely effective in showcasing the true appeal of Wet Leg as a duo, which is their catchy, upbeat post-punk revivalism. Like their 2 most acclaimed singles, Chaise, Longue and Wet Dream, which, not to sound like I'm just going with the crowd or whatever, but they might be my 2 personal favourites on this project. Chaise Longue has some pretty funny innuendos littered throughout and a great riff on the hook. And Wet Dream is as fun and catchy as this record gets, in my opinion. The rising tension on the instrumental is impeccable, and the production and vocal melody on that chorus is perfect. Plus, the references to masturbation and incel culture come off surprisingly well. But at this point, you might be noticing a key issue within these tracks. They're all massively reliant on the quality of the hooks, which is fine for the most part. A lot of indie rock leans heavily on hooks after all, and a lot of Wet Leg's choruses are great. But it means that when the melody just isn't there, it's incredibly noticeable, and by the end of the record, you can't help but feel that they were running out of ideas. The vocal performance on Supermarket, for example, is probably the worst on the whole project. That wailing chorus falling completely flat on a laid-back track that needed a great performance to tie it together. Or, whatever the hell Oh No was. The track might work for some people, but personally I found it to be by far the worst of the singles. The really heavy guitar and staggered melody just not working at all, especially within the album context. I don't know, man, I like this album, for sure. It's got some fantastic songs, but it was also massively overhyped from what I can see. I don't know who made the executive decision to release so many singles, but it really killed the album performance as a whole. Maybe if they'd kept Your Mum and Angelica as album cuts rather than singles, there would be a little more reason to listen to this, but the way it stands, the intro track is basically the only non-single I'd really want to come back to. And unfortunately, I think it'll kill people's expectations of them in the future, since no matter how good their singles are, there's always going to be that air of cynicism that hangs around them, where you can't really expect too much from their projects until they're released. I know that'll be an issue for me at least, despite the fact that I still generally enjoy this one. It's a solid 7 out of 10, but the deep cuts really let this one down, and it relies on a strong start to keep it going. Still, worth a listen in my opinion, and Wet Leg definitely have the ability to make even better tracks in the future.